Imagine this: a wealthy businessman, known for his no-nonsense attitude and sharp business skills, visits a local orphanage as part of a charity initiative. The purpose of his visit? To bring gifts for the kids and donate some funds. But what he doesn't expect is to see a young boy with strikingly familiar features, so familiar, in fact, that it stops him in his tracks. It's as if he's looking into a mirror, back in time, at himself as a young child. This is the story of Mr. Grant, a millionaire whose life changed forever after a single encounter at the orphanage. Mr. Grant was the classic self-made millionaire. He'd grown up with very little, had to work through college, and built his fortune from the ground up. He was proud of his success and known for his strong will. Over the years, he'd become somewhat of a local celebrity, admired for his business acumen, but also respected for his philanthropy. He regularly donated to various charities, but he rarely visited the places his donations went. This time, however, he'd been invited by the orphanage director for a visit to interact with the kids. He arrived at the orphanage one cool autumn afternoon, with bags of gifts in hand and a generous donation ready for the staff. As he stepped into the main room, the children's eyes lit up, some running up to greet him with bright smiles. Mr. Grant smiled back, handing out gifts and listening to the kids share stories about their lives and dreams. But it was halfway through the visit that he noticed a young boy sitting quietly in the corner, watching him intently. This boy didn't come forward like the other children. He was just sitting there, observing, his eyes filled with something unspoken. There was a stillness about him, a quiet strength, that caught Mr. Grant's attention. The boy looked to be around 10 years old, with dark hair and eyes that seemed almost too wise for his age. But what struck Mr. Grant the most was something he couldn't quite place at first: a familiarity in the boy's features, in the way he looked at the world with a mix of curiosity and caution. As Mr. Grant looked more closely, a chill ran down his spine. The boy's face, his expressions, it was as if he were staring at his own childhood self. His mind raced, but he told himself he was being silly. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling, and he found himself walking over to the boy. "What's your name?" Mr. Grant asked, his voice softer than usual. The boy looked up at him, a bit surprised. "Eli," he replied, almost shyly. Mr. Grant nodded, kneeling down to be at eye level with Eli. "It's nice to meet you, Eli. How long have you been here?" The boy shrugged. "A couple of years, I guess." There was something in his tone that made Mr. Grant's heart ache, a certain loneliness that he recognized from his own past. He couldn't help but feel a strange connection to this boy, one that went beyond mere looks. They ended up talking for a while, and with each word Eli spoke, Mr. Grant felt a growing urge to understand more about this young boy's story. Eli shared bits and pieces of his life, how he'd been moved from place to place, never really having a family to call his own. Listening to him, Mr. Grant felt emotions rise within him that he hadn't felt in years. He remembered his own difficult childhood, moving from one small town to another, feeling alone and out of place. But there was something more, something he couldn't quite put into words. As Mr. Grant left the orphanage that day, he couldn't get Eli out of his mind. The boy's face haunted him, filling him with questions he couldn't answer. Was it possible that they were related? The thought seemed absurd, yet the resemblance was too uncanny to ignore. Over the next few days, he found himself looking at old photos from his childhood, comparing them to Eli's face in his memory. The resemblance was undeniable. Determined to find out more, Mr. Grant returned to the orphanage under the pretense of dropping off some extra donations. But in reality, he wanted to learn more about Eli. He asked the orphanage director about Eli's background, hoping to find some clues. She told him that Eli had been brought to the orphanage at a young age, and that little was known about his family. The records were sparse, and no relatives had ever come forward. Mr. Grant couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. He began investigating further, using his resources to dig deeper into Eli's past. It was a challenging process, but he was persistent. After weeks of research, he found something shocking, a name that linked Eli to his own family. Years ago, in his younger days, Mr. Grant had been in a brief relationship with a woman he'd lost touch with. He'd always assumed they'd gone their separate ways, without any lasting impact. But now he wondered if that relationship had produced a child he didn't know about. It was a painful realization, but he knew he had to face the truth. He arranged a DNA test, seeking answers he both dreaded and hoped for. The results confirmed what he had already felt in his heart. Eli was his son. This revelation rocked Mr. Grant to his core. He felt a mixture of guilt, joy, and a deep sense of responsibility. He'd missed out on years of his son's life, years he could never get back. But he was determined to make things right. He returned to the orphanage, his mind racing with thoughts of how he could approach Eli with this news. When he arrived, he found Eli in the same corner, sitting with his usual quiet demeanor. Taking a deep breath, Mr. Grant sat beside him. The words didn't come easily. He struggled to find a way to explain everything without overwhelming the boy. Eventually, he simply said, "Eli, there's something important I need to tell you." The boy looked at him, curiosity in his eyes. Slowly, Mr. Grant explained the situation, choosing his words carefully. As he spoke, Eli listened, his expression a mixture of surprise, confusion, and hope. When Mr. Grant finally finished, there was a long pause, both of them taking in the weight of the moment. "So you're my dad?" Eli asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Yes," Mr. Grant replied, his eyes welling up with tears. "And I'm so sorry I wasn't there for you before. But if you'll let me, I want to be here for you now." Eli was quiet, processing everything. And then, in a moment that melted Mr. Grant's heart, the boy leaned in and hugged him. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they shared, despite the years they'd lost. From that day forward, Mr. Grant dedicated himself to building a relationship with his son. He made arrangements to legally adopt Eli, bringing him home and introducing him to the family he'd never known. It wasn't an easy transition. They had to learn about each other, overcome misunderstandings, and adapt to their new lives together. But gradually, they found their rhythm, forging a father-son relationship filled with love, respect, and mutual admiration. Mr. Grant continued his philanthropy, but this time with a deeper understanding of what family and connection truly meant. And Eli thrived, growing into a confident, kind-hearted young man with the guidance of the father he'd always hoped for. They spent hours together, talking, laughing, and making up for lost time. This story spread throughout the community, touching the hearts of many who saw it as a testament to the power of love, redemption, and second chances. Mr. Grant had gone to the orphanage expecting to give, but in the end, he'd received a gift far more valuable than money or success. A son he never knew he had, and a love that filled the missing pieces of his heart. So, there you have it, the story of a millionaire who went to an orphanage to bring joy, only to discover a miracle that would change his life forever. Sometimes, life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it, and in ways we never could have imagined. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.